Struggling in the land of opportunity. The first time Kwame Boateng stepped onto American soil, he felt like he had stepped into a dream. Back home in Ghana, people spoke of the United States like a land where dollars grew on trees, and where anyone who worked hard could become rich. He had come to Boston on a student visa, clutching his small suitcase, a heart full of hope, and just $250 in his pocket. But dreams have a way of shattering quickly. 3 months in, reality hit him like the biting winter wind. The rent for his small shared basement room was almost half his earnings. His student fees piled up, and the little he earned from washing dishes at a small diner barely kept him alive. Most nights, he went to bed with nothing but tea in his stomach, shivering under a thin blanket as the cold seeped in through the cracks in the walls. His family back in Kumasi thought he was living the good life. Whenever his mother called, he forced a smile into his voice. "Yes, Ma. Everything is fine. America is good." But as soon as the call ended, the mask would drop, and he'd sit in the dark, wondering if coming here was a mistake. One snowy evening, as he trudged home from the diner, his shoes soaked through and his stomach aching, Kwame stopped in front of a shop window. The reflection staring back at him was not the proud young man who had landed here with dreams in his eyes, but a tired, hungry stranger. And yet, deep inside, he promised himself, "I will make it. I will not go back empty-handed." Welcome to Nightfall Tales by Wara, where we bring you stories that will touch your heart, stir your soul, and keep you glued till the very last second. Struggling in the land of opportunity. The first time Kwame Boateng stepped onto American soil, he felt like he had stepped into a dream. Back home in Ghana, people spoke of the United States like a land where dollars grew on trees, and where anyone who worked hard could become rich. He had come to Boston on a student visa, clutching his small suitcase, a heart full of hope, and just $250 in his pocket. But dreams have a way of shattering quickly. 3 months in, reality hit him like the biting winter wind. The rent for his small shared basement room was almost half his earnings. His student fees piled up, and the little he earned from washing dishes at a small diner barely kept him alive. Most nights, he went to bed with nothing but tea in his stomach, shivering under a thin blanket as the cold seeped in through the cracks in the walls. His family back in Kumasi thought he was living the good life. Whenever his mother called, he forced a smile into his voice. "Yes, Ma. Everything is fine. America is good." But as soon as the call ended, the mask would drop, and he'd sit in the dark, wondering if coming here was a mistake. One snowy evening, as he trudged home from the diner, his shoes soaked through and his stomach aching, Kwame stopped in front of a shop window. The reflection staring back at him was not the proud young man who had landed here with dreams in his eyes, but a tired, hungry stranger. And yet, deep inside, he promised himself, "I will make it. I will not go back empty-handed." The day everything changed. It was a slow Tuesday morning at the diner where Kwame worked. He was behind the counter, wiping cups, when the door chimed and a cold gust of wind rushed in. She walked in. Margaret Hayes, 58, a short woman with kind eyes, wrapped in a long brown coat, her white hair peeking out from under a knitted hat. She gave a small smile, the kind that felt warm in a place full of strangers. "Coffee, black, and maybe a slice of that pie," she said softly. Kwame served her with his usual politeness, and when she glanced at his name tag, she smiled. "Kwame, that's a nice name. Where's it from?" He hesitated, not many customers asked. "Ghana, ma'am," he replied. "Oh, Ghana," she said, her voice softening, "I've never been there, but I've heard it's beautiful." That day, she stayed longer than most customers, sipping her coffee slowly, occasionally glancing at him. When she left, she tipped generously, far more than most people. The next day, she was back. And the day after that. Little by little, they began to talk more. She learned he was studying part-time, working illegally because his visa restrictions made proper jobs impossible. He learned she had lost her husband 5 years ago, her only daughter lived far away, and most days she ate alone. There was something unspoken between them, a quiet recognition of loneliness in each other. A proposal like no other. 2 weeks later, Kwame sat at the back of the diner during his short break, staring at an unopened email from the university. His hands shook as he finally clicked it. "We regret to inform you. The words blurred as tears welled up. He had lost his student status, which meant his visa would expire in 30 days. 30 days before he'd be sent back home in shame. That evening, when Margaret came in, she noticed his red eyes. "Kwame, what's wrong?" she asked, concern etched on her face. He tried to brush it off, but she pressed until the truth spilled out. He expected pity, maybe an awkward silence. Instead, she reached across the table, her wrinkled hand covering his. "What if I married you?" she said quietly. He froze. "Ma'am, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she cut in. "But you're a good man. You've been kind to me when you didn't have to be. And I can't stand by and watch your life get destroyed because of some paper." For a moment, Kwame's mind was a storm. Was this a miracle? Was this a trap? Could he even do this without falling into trouble? But looking into her eyes, he saw no malice, only a genuine, almost motherly desire to help. "If we do this," she said, "we do it right. No games, no lies to each other. We help each other, because I think we both need it." And in that quiet, snowy evening, in a small diner no one would remember, a deal that would change both their lives was made. The wedding that wasn't supposed to be. The courthouse was quiet that morning. It wasn't the kind of wedding Kwame had dreamed of as a boy in Ghana. No drums, no dancing, no family gathering under the bright sun. Instead, it was him in a borrowed gray suit, Margaret in a simple blue dress, standing before a clerk who read out vows in a bored voice. But to Margaret, this was more than a transaction. And to Kwame, it was the moment that would decide his entire future. "Do you, Kwame Boateng, take Margaret Hayes?" He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, before answering, "I do." When it was Margaret's turn, her voice was steady, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. After the paperwork, they stood outside on the courthouse steps, the winter wind whipping around them. Margaret smiled faintly. "Well, Mr. Boateng, looks like you're officially stuck with me." Kwame laughed softly, the first real laugh in weeks. "And you with me, Mrs. Boateng." No one clapped, no camera flashes went off. But in a strange way, it felt pure. Like two lost souls had decided to share the same small boat in a raging sea. The world starts talking. The first whispers came from the neighbors in Margaret's building. A young African man moving into the apartment of an older white woman was bound to raise eyebrows. At the grocery store, people stared. At the bus stop, some smirked. A cashier once joked under his breath, "Guess love comes in all interesting packages." Kwame tried to ignore it, but inside, shame and discomfort grew. Margaret noticed, and one evening over dinner she said, "Kwame, let them talk. They don't know us. They don't know what we've been through." But what hurt more were the calls from Ghana. A cousin hinted that Kwame must be doing things for an old woman just to stay in America. Friends back home joked that he was now Mr. Pension. Margaret, on her part, faced her own set of whispers, from old church friends who accused her of being taken advantage of, to relatives who thought she'd lost her mind. Yet, through it all, they developed a quiet routine. Cooking together, watching TV in the evenings, and talking about everything from African food to Boston history. Slowly, the line between arrangement and friendship began to blur. The moment he realized she was more than a deal. It was a bitterly cold night in late February when Kwame came down with the flu. He tried to hide it, but by the next morning, he was shivering under the blanket, too weak to stand. Margaret, seeing him pale and weak, dropped everything. She made hot soup, brought extra blankets, and sat by his bed, wiping his forehead with a damp cloth. When he protested, embarrassed, she silenced him gently. "Kwame, you've taken care of yourself for too long. Let someone take care of you for once." Her voice was soft, but the weight of those words hit deep. Back home, he'd been taught that a man must never depend on a woman, especially not in such a vulnerable way. But here he was, letting her tuck him in, letting her fuss over him like a mother, a friend, and something more. That night, as she left his room after checking his temperature, Kwame lay awake staring at the ceiling. He realized something he hadn't dared to think before. This woman wasn't just his way to stay in America. She was his home in a country that had never felt like one. Immigration knocks at the door. It happened on a cloudy Thursday morning. Kwame was making breakfast when there was a loud knock at the door. Two stern-faced immigration officers stood outside, flashing badges. "Mr. Kwame Boateng? Mrs. Margaret Boateng? We need to speak with you." Margaret's face paled, but she stood her ground. They invited the officers in, and soon, the questions began. How did you meet? Who paid for your wedding? What's Kwame's favorite food? Which side of the bed does Margaret sleep on? The questions were rapid, designed to trip them up. Kwame's heart raced, but every answer came naturally because their story, though it began as an arrangement, had grown into something real. When the officers finally left, Margaret collapsed into a chair, trembling. Kwame knelt beside her, holding her hands. "We'll be fine, Margaret. They can't take away what we have." But inside, he knew this was just the beginning of the real test. The storm before the sun. The stress of the investigation began to take a toll. Kwame worked extra hours to save money for legal help, while Margaret worried constantly. They argued over small things, the dishes, the bills, the late nights. One evening, during a particularly heated argument, Margaret blurted out, "Maybe they were right. Maybe you're only here for the papers." The words cut deep. Kwame stared at her, his chest rising and falling. "If that's what you truly believe, then you never knew me at all." He walked out into the freezing night, wandering the streets until his fingers went numb. Images of his family back home, his struggles here, and Margaret's acts of kindness flooded his mind. By the time he returned hours later, Margaret was waiting at the door, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Kwame. I didn't mean it. I'm just scared." He pulled her into a hug, his own eyes wet. "We're in this together, Margaret. No matter what." Weeks later, they sat once again in the immigration office, the very scene from the opening of this story. The officer closed the file slowly, his expression unreadable. "Mr. and Mrs. Boateng, your case has been reviewed thoroughly." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "We find no reason to doubt the authenticity of your marriage. Congratulations, your application is approved." Margaret let out a shaky laugh. Kwame felt a weight lift from his chest so suddenly that he almost collapsed. Outside, the winter sun was shining, the snow glistening like silver dust. Margaret took his arm, and for the first time since arriving in America, Kwame felt the warmth of belonging. "You saved me, Margaret," he said softly. She smiled through her tears. "No, Kwame. We saved each other." The call from home. 3 months after the immigration approval, life had started to feel normal. Kwame was working part-time at a delivery company while taking night classes, and Margaret was volunteering at the local library. They laughed more, argued less, and began to believe that the hardest days were behind them. Then the phone rang. It was his younger sister, Amma, calling from Ghana. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Kwame. Mama is sick. The doctors say it's her heart. We need money for surgery, a lot of money." Kwame's heart sank. He promised to send what he could, but when he checked his bank account, the reality hit: he didn't have even a fraction of the amount needed. Margaret, seeing his distress, sat beside him. "How much is it?" she asked. When he told her, she didn't hesitate. "We'll find a way. I'll help you." But Kwame shook his head. "No, Margaret. I can't let you carry my family's burden. You've done enough for me already." It was pride and fear of looking like a burden that made him refuse. But the unspoken truth was that he didn't know how to accept help without feeling small. That night, Margaret lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if loving someone sometimes meant helping them, even when they didn't want it. The return trip. By spring, after months of saving and with Margaret secretly contributing, they gathered enough for the surgery. The operation was successful, and Kwame's mother began to recover. "You need to go home and see her," Margaret insisted one evening. you haven't been back in years." Stepping off the plane in Accra after so long was like stepping into a warm embrace. The smell of grilled fish, the chatter of market women, the loud honking of TROTROS, it all wrapped around him like a familiar blanket. When he walked into his family's small compound, his mother burst into tears, holding him tightly. "My son, my American son," she whispered. The joy was overwhelming, but not everyone was happy. Some neighbors whispered about how a young man like Kwame could marry a woman old enough to be his mother. Cousins teased him, saying he had found a shortcut to citizenship. Still, the most nerve-wracking moment came when Margaret arrived a week later. She stepped out of the taxi in a light cotton dress, the heat already reddening her cheeks. Kwame's mother stared at her for a long moment before pulling her into a hug. "You saved my son," she said simply. Margaret's eyes shone with tears. The culture clash. Margaret tried her best to adjust to Ghana. She smiled at strangers, learned to eat fufu, and even danced awkwardly to highlife music at a family gathering. But it wasn't easy. The heat was unbearable for her, the mosquitoes relentless, and the constant stares from locals made her uncomfortable. One afternoon, at a family lunch, Kwame's cousin Abina leaned in with a smirk. "Kwame, you know you can still marry a Ghanaian woman too. Our culture allows it." Margaret froze, her fork midway to her mouth. Kwame's jaw tightened. "Abina, this is my wife. That's not up for discussion." It was the first time he had defended her so openly in front of his family, and Margaret never forgot it. Still, the cultural gap was real, and when they finally boarded the plane back to Boston, both felt relieved, but also more bonded than before. A test of loyalty. Back in the US, life settled into routine again. Margaret lost her part-time library job due to budget cuts, and Kwame picked up more delivery shifts to cover expenses. His late nights on the road became a point of tension. One evening, he delivered food to a regular customer, a young waitress named Tiffany, who always smiled a little too warmly and lingered a little too long. Margaret found a napkin in his jacket pocket with a lipstick mark on it. She didn't say anything at first, but her silence was heavy. Finally, one night she asked, "Kwame, are you sure I'm enough for you? I'm not young, I'm not glamorous." He looked at her, startled. "Margaret, I didn't marry you for beauty contests. I married you because you're the person who saved my life. You're the one I want." The sincerity in his voice melted her doubts, but a seed of insecurity remained. The accident. It was a snowy January evening when the delivery car's tires hit a patch of black ice. The vehicle spun, slammed into a lamppost, and everything went black. When Kwame woke in the hospital, his leg was wrapped in a heavy cast. The doctor explained he'd need weeks of recovery and physical therapy. Margaret moved his bed to the living room so he wouldn't have to climb stairs. She cooked his meals, helped him bathe, and kept him company through long winter nights. "I'm supposed to be the one taking care of you," he joked one night. "Sometimes," she replied softly, "love is about taking turns." The surprise visitor. One warm April afternoon, Kwame opened the door to find Kojo, his childhood best friend from Ghana, grinning at him. "My brother. America at last." Kojo boomed, hugging him tightly. At first, it was joyous late-night conversations, shared memories, laughter over Ghanaian food. But Kwame began noticing Kojo's sly comments. "Ah, you're living the dream. Free rent, American wife, and papers. You smart, my brother." Margaret overheard one of these remarks and withdrew into quiet politeness. Kwame confronted Kojo, telling him to respect his wife or leave. The friendship cooled, but Kwame felt no regret. Some relationships couldn't survive when they disrespected what you valued most. The promise renewed. 3 years to the day after their courthouse wedding, Kwame surprised Margaret. He took her back to the same courthouse steps, now bathed in the golden glow of sunset. Friends from church, a few of Kwame's relatives who supported them, and even some of Margaret's old friends gathered around. Margaret's eyes widened as Kwame knelt, holding a small gold band. "Margaret Hayes Boateng, the first time I married you, it was for survival. Today, I marry you for love." Tears streamed down her face as they exchanged vows again, not out of necessity, but out of choice. And as they kissed, surrounded by applause and the hum of evening traffic, Kwame knew this was the real beginning of his American dream. Morale of this story. Sometimes, what begins as a lifeline becomes a love story, not because of where you meet, but because of how you stay. Thanks for watching. This is Nightfall Tales by Wara. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe and comment for more videos.